We have a great episode in store for you today. Glad you joined us because Timothy Brown joins us to talk about a man that helped make football safe in the game it is today. May have saved football, and you may have never heard of him. Tim's coming up in just a moment to tell us all about it.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history. Your host, Darin Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darin Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal for positive football history. And welcome to another Tuesday edition where we get to visit with our friend Timothy P. Brown of FootballArchaeology.com. And we've got a great topic tonight to talk about with one of his tidbits. Tim, welcome back to the Pig Pen.
Hey, how you doing, Darin? Looking forward to chatting and maybe McCracken you up a little bit.
Sounds like a bad McDonald's breakfast or something. I don't know. Well, it's just a bad dad joke, which we're famous for.
I think it's the latter.
Right. Well, yeah, you segue us right in here, sort of, into your topic. You had a tidbit a little while ago. Stadium-sized football droppers and de-emphasizers, the series you're running on the NYU talk. It's a very interesting figure in American football history that doesn't get as much credit as he should for some things that he did.
Yeah, that's actually what I was going to start with was just the point that he's one of these guys who played a kind of a brief role, but an important role. And, but unless you're kind of a dork, football historian, you're probably not familiar with him. So, but, the guy's, his name was Henry Mitchell McCracken. I'm not sure why everybody back then had to use their middle name all the time, but he did. So, he ended up being, he became, NYU's chancellor, sometime, kind of 1896 or something, in that kind of time frame. And NYU is one of those schools that, you don't think about anymore as playing football, but they were one of the first, they started their football. I mean, it would have been soccer at the time, but they started their, they played their first intercollegiate game in 1873. So, even before, as far as I'm concerned, before football existed, they were playing soccer. So, long history of playing the game, but they pretty much always played it at kind of a second or third tier level. That changed like in the 20s and 30s. They had some really, very, very strong teams, nationally prominent teams, but and then they shut it down later on. But the thing about McCracken that's really interesting is that he's kind of known for two things. He's known for one thing. People probably aren't generally aware of the first thing, which is that he I don't know if he visited Germany or whatever, but there was a place in Munich that he became aware of that was basically a hall of fame in Germany. And at the time, there were no halls of fame in the United States. So he liked the idea. And so he created and got the funding for the Hall of Fame for Great Americans, which opened in 1901. And that building behind me is that hall. It still exists. It's now on what used to be one of NYU's campuses up in the Bronx. They left there, I want to say in the 60s or early 70s, something like that. And so that building still exists, but it's on a community college campus now. And then this is the field that was called Ohio Field, but that was a field that NYU played on, for their home games. So just the fact, basically every Hall of Fame that, exists probably owes some level of credit to McCracken importing it, from Germany. Maybe somebody else would have, but, he was the first one
Now, what kind of people were in the Hall of Fame? Was it just athletes, or was it?
Yeah, no, this is like political figures and philosophers and scientists and things like that.
Okay,
So yeah, it's not a
more of an
nothing
academic
that, yeah,
academia type of Hall of Fame.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah, yeah. And I think, it's kind of an open air sort of deal, and little rotunda and whatnot. Um, so then the other thing that his most notable contribution to football was that, he was a guy who was making some noise about the, in the 1904, 1905 timeframe, he was making some noise about the danger of football, he was questioning its place as the rules existed at the time. Um, and so he's making a little bit of noise on that, but NYU wasn't a big enough team that people really were going to pay too much attention to him. And but then later in the 1905 season, uh, NYU was hosting Union College at Ohio Field, and a Union College player was killed during the game. So, I think he was alive when he left the field, but he died, shortly thereafter. Um, and it was just one of those things where, McCracken just said, this has to stop. And so he, wrote to, kind of university presidents, chancellors, kind of all over the place, published some things in newspapers, and basically demanded that the rule that that there was an existing rules organization, and he basically said, these people have not fixed this problem. They've had their chances. We're going to gather kind of a separate Congress or group of people, come together in New York City, and we're going to we're going to develop new rules, new systems, whatever it takes to clean up the game. And so they ended up, there were 60, 70 representatives from universities, primarily in the East, some from some in the Midwest, but Harvard was one of them. So that, was an important, uh, you know, contributing university to that whole thing. And out of that came the, what they called the Intercollegiate Athletic Association of the United States. Um, and so they met and they identified a subcommittee that was going to work on developing new rules. And but shortly after the turn of the year, so January of 06, they essentially took that subcommittee and merged it with the existing rules making body. And so, basically they were ready to go their separate way, but they were convinced to kind of come together. And so that combined committee met, 4 or 5 times over the next, handful of months, and eventually issued a new set of rules that, people had agreed to. McCracken and others, looked at that set of rules and said, yeah, this is going to work. This should clean up the game. And so we will continue playing football. Now, some schools chose not to do that. Columbia dropped football, Northwestern dropped football, Cal and Stanford dropped football, and and there were others. Um, but then the thing about that, the IAAUS, which most people aren't familiar with, that acronym or the organization, but in 1910 that organization changed its name, and it's now the NCAA. So basically, he was kind of, McCracken was, essentially at the forefront of changing the rules in the 1905, 1906, session, and then ultimately that organization created what's now the NCAA. So, kind of a big deal in terms
yeah,
of college football and college sports, more broadly.
yeah, real big deal. Now, is it fair to say, Tim, that because you don't hear of too many presidents of colleges and chancellors getting involved in sports, but at that time he did because there was no NCAA or governing body, so he sort of had to. Is that fair to say?
Well, yeah. So the the chancellor president of Harvard at the time, a guy named Elliott, he was very involved, and there were multiple times like he shut Harvard's football down for at least one season. So, part of it, schools were just a heck of a lot smaller, right? I mean, even at the start of World War One, Penn was the biggest school in the country and it had 7,000 students. So, these organizations they were just much smaller, and faculty, the faculties had a whole lot more control. And so even like the Big Ten, its official name is like the, Conference of Intercollegiate Faculties or something. So,
Mhm.
when it formed, it was, faculty representatives, faculty deans, whatever from each school that got together and established. In that case, it was more eligibility and, eligibility rules as opposed to playing rules. So they did get into that a little bit later too. So, yeah, I mean, just generally there were, the presidents and faculties just had, I mean, the level of control they had
Mhm.
over students was just something we don't even conceive of today. If they said you can't go to, you can't travel to a game, then you didn't travel to a game. And I mean, like the non-playing students, just people who are there as fans. If you did something stupid, they'd boot you off campus. I mean, so they had a lot more discretion, and definitely a whole lot more control over just the behavior of students.
Yeah, it's interesting how much things have changed in 120 some years. Even on the college campuses
Yeah,
to everything, just the basics like that. So, yeah.
but even then, even in 1905, the vast majority of coaches were still volunteers, right? And or it was somebody who had, like Harvard and Yale, they just had a guy. Typically, it was the captain from the previous year. He was the coach the next year. So it was still much more of a student-run organizations, and then you had alumni who did some, kind of fundraising, money management kind of things for the team. Um, but even then, like the student manager back then was the guy who ran the show from a scheduling standpoint, money standpoint, arranging travel, all that kind of stuff. So, the burden on the kids was a lot more, a lot heavier than it is today.
Yeah, wow. Amazing stuff. Great, great.
Yeah, I mean, there's some of it like, there's guys who, you just think about, they're basically writing or telegraphing to set up a schedule with somebody else. Um, you know, they arrange for trains and special trains so that fans can go from, whatever, Champaign Urbana to, you know, Lafayette, Indiana, whatever it is, so they were just college kids, right?
And many times these schedules weren't laid out in advance like we are know today. Like we probably know a 2025 schedule right now
Yeah, yeah,
for everybody. These are like week to week sometimes, or day to day even.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's in a time that you have not the communication levels that we have today. I don't know if somebody got on horseback and telegraphed or whatever to get a game schedule and then get 22 players at least on a field at the same time. That's amazing.
yeah, yeah. And well, back then a lot of times, teams would travel with like 15 guys, and then they'd take, if there was a coach, they'd take a trainer and probably a dog as their mascot, and that's kind of the
Uh,
deal.
But I just equate it to, trying to get the family to go on a weekend getaway. That's all of a sudden, you can't get everybody's schedules together, but having people that aren't your family that are all over campus and God only knows where they are and get them to go play a football game. That just astounds me that they were able to do that.
Yeah. Well, and the other ones are like, we did an article, quite a while back about North Carolina being the first Southern team to play in the North, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it was 1893. And, they came up to New York City. They played at, Polo Grounds or, one of those, Manhattan Field, one of the two. And, you know, but they just kind of picked up and jumped on a train and headed up there. And, they stayed in a fancy hotel and everything. But, um, you know, it was just,
But
very much a different time.
yeah, but some of those are I'm not even talking like those are like Sewanee, taking their 7 days.
Yeah.
That was sort of pre-planned. And okay, I'm talking about, hey, so I just got in contact with so and so. We're going to play Wednesday. Today's Saturday. We're going to play Wednesday. We're going to travel 2 hours by train to get there. So
Yeah.
let's get all your stuff together. We're going down there, and then we're coming back the
Yeah.
same day too.
Yeah. And a lot of times, well, like you said, they might have played on Saturday, and then all of a sudden they've got a Tuesday game. So,
Yeah.
and I think that was maybe a little bit more the case with some of the smaller schools, just kind of scheduling things on a fly, because they weren't going to attract much of a crowd anyways. But yeah, times were different.
Yeah, much different. Well, Tim, this is brilliant that you get to talk about people like Mr. McCracken and some of his great things that he did for football and his importance to the game that would be long forgotten. And you do this quite a bit, and even some of the items in football and your tidbits each day. Maybe you could just share with the audience how they can partake in your tidbits.
Sure. Easiest thing, just go to my just Google footballarchaeology.com, and you can subscribe. There's just all you got to do is submit your email address, and there's free versions, there's paid versions, and then you will get an email every time I publish an article. You'll get an email with the contents of that article in there, and then you can also just still go to the site whenever you want. There's 1,100 articles plus out there, so use the search function, find something you're interested in, and have at it.
It's some great stuff, and it's a great research tool too. If you want to learn something more about NYU or any college or any player, that's a great thing to do too on the footballarchaeology.com site. So Tim, we thank you a lot, and we'd love to talk to you again about some more football history next Tuesday.
Very good. We'll have to figure out what to talk about.